when I was asked to do this, I think Jonathan, a couple others, wondered what I would do, and I wondered what I would do as well. I believe that this is about the most important topic that we can get into in our time, intellectually, culturally. I think that the idea of human nature is key to this. I brought up the phrase of human consciousness. I think the developments in the morning newspapers indicate that war is at the core of everything. It seems to me throughout history, Barry Strauss knows about this better than anyone. War makes things happen. War generates ideas. Ideas come out of war. And it's ideas that create wars. Why are there wars? You can find that dealt with in Herodotus. Very amusingly in many ways, but profoundly. So trying to get at that is what I'd like to talk about today. I brought along a little book by Marshall Salins, if you know of him, University of Chicago, anthropologist. The title of this is called The Western Illusion of Human Nature. There isn't any such thing as human nature, says Salins. I would go at it, I am going to go at it from the point of view of rhetoric, as in if there's a human nature that is fundamental, it's we are the language animal. And you can see across antiquity and into our time, the rhetoric of a place and time is wrapped up in war. It's behind war. It's generated by war in a very profound way. The Iliad seems to me to be entirely a poem about the rhetoric of war. In a cyclical, in a time sense, living in a Homeric age is a cyclical time. Life just starts, you're born, trees are planted, they grow, they mature, they wither, they die, and another tree comes along. And they find meaning. The meaning of life is found in the Iliad, in war, in Achilles. As Simone Weil is written, it's the poem of force. It's the rhetoric of force. And how you live is going to be, and how you are judged to have lived is going to be entirely your conduct in warfare. The Aeneid is something quite other than that. The Aeneid, you can see Aeneas is, in some sense, anything but an Achilles. And the Aeneid is a rhetoric of change, all circling around the idea of warfare and the creation of a state. And the change there is the transformation from an Iliadic warrior to what might be a civic hero. Aeneas is pretty clearly unclear himself about who he is and what he's doing. You know, Aeneas is kind of a dull dog. He's wandering around the Mediterranean after the Trojan War, and he sort of knows what he's supposed to be doing, but not exactly. And the gods have got to send Mercury to him to try to convince him what he should be doing. Eventually, he has to go to the underworld, where his father will tell him what his mission is. And his mission then becomes clear to him, and that is to establish world peace. He is to be a fighter. He is to do what he has to do to establish a new polity, and that polity will gain, as Virgil makes it clear, will gain world power. And the aim of that, the responsibility is to bring peace to the world. Strangely, this is got a touch, it's touched by the rise of Christianity in a strange, I'm sure no one here has read Pope Benedict XVI's book on the infant narratives of Jesus. But in that, the Pope talks about the strange connections between the rise of Rome and the rhetoric of Christianity, of Augustus coming before Jesus is the Prince of Peace. And the strange connections there that make it almost rhetorically easier or more naturally done for the new Christian thing to eventually step into the Roman Empire. Augustine, St. Augustine, writing in the City of God, gives us the idea of a just war, getting into philosophical, theological views about war as part of human nature. That war is not something that you can say is an aberration. That war is built in to us. Strangely, and this comes out in Herodotus, you get what is perfectly obvious, but nonetheless not well recognized, that we human beings, in our human nature, we alone of all the animals are not hardwired for a political system. Other animals are. Herodotus goes to Egypt, looking around in his book 2. When it's assigned in college, nobody ever assigns book 2 because it seems to be about nothing but cats and crocodiles. But Herodotus is conveying a sense that crocodiles have a crocodile life. Cats have a cat life. Crocodiles don't have to sit around seminar tables and talk about what does it mean to be a crocodile. Human beings do. That's all we do. How weird is that? And Herodotus then goes around the Eastern Mediterranean, and he goes from one valley to the next, and there's a different political system everywhere he goes. An infinite number of them. And they are not the same, and they don't do the things the same way, and they get into conflicts as a result of that, and you have wars. So Augustine factors that kind of approach in, and it goes to the Christian idea of original sin, that this is a fallen world in which bad things go on happening all the time. I think it was Reinhold Niebuhr who said that original sin is the only Christian doctrine that has been empirically proved. So you have wars. So then Augustine is working up the idea of a just war, which means that if you can define a just war, you are somehow bringing a kind of constraint, a human constraint, to something that's in the human nature. And but it means that there will have to be wars. That the prince, this is Augustinian realism, the prince before Machiavelli's prince will have to take, as Augustine says, severe decisions. including in Augustine's big book, the death penalty. You have to do things to maintain basic order in the world. Not because this is our world, it's not in an Augustinian position, but because you have to have basic stability and security to do the things you really want to do beyond that. So my point here is really something like every society is working up a rhetoric that in some sense is built around war or war and peace. Medieval life is doing this in the concept of chivalry. You know, how do you tame the mounted warrior? How do you find a way that is rhetorically, intellectually persuasive to make the people who are going to be doing the fighting civilized, and doing it in a way that has a higher purpose in their minds and in the society's mind. And again, it's all built around around warfare. It's not only Western. We have been teaching in the course I teach with John Lewis Gaddis and Paul Kennedy and a few others, Sun Tzu. And you'll all know Sun Tzu, The Art of War. That's an interesting document, extremely popular in our time. I think not fully recognized as to what it was in its time. It looks pretty clear from the scholarship that it is a forgery. It's a forgery from one ancient Chinese period of time, pretending to be another time. It is in the spring and autumn period, but it's being written as though it's in the warring states. I'm sorry, the other way around, warring states, but in the spring and autumn period. The attempt in this seems to be to provide a rhetoric for Chinese warfare that would make it legitimate, that would make the soldier, would make the general, the military minds, make Sun Tzu himself legitimate, because the form of war that he is describing is in some sense compatible with Confucianism, which seems to be a non-military form of thought entirely. And so students reading Sun Tzu's Art of War kind of cold, they love this stuff. Because Sun Tzu says, you want to win wars without fighting. Students like that stuff. And they think you can win wars without fighting. And it's put forward in The Art of War by Sun Tzu in order to give it a Confucian overlay. So again, it's the cultural rhetoric of the time that we have here. Rembrandt's great painting in the Met, Aristotle contemplating the bust of Homer. And this is a rhetoric of war, wars to come, wars that have just taken place. The meaning of this is, I think, profound, but not much, if at all, and analyzed in the art critics world. You can see that Aristotle is portrayed by Rembrandt holding his hand over the head of the bust of Homer, Homer being, of course, the author of the Iliad, about warfare. Homer, it's more than just war. The painting is about the other dimensions of human nature and culture that are involved in war. Homer is a poet. Homer, you could see in the original, not in this bad copy, is blind. He's a bard, in some sense, in this. The depiction of Aristotle gives you the sense that what Aristotle is gaining is something from the mind of Homer that's coming up his arm into his head. Aristotle is, of course, the philosopher. So we've got philosophy in this. And then around Aristotle's neck is a chain, finally a goldsmith chain, with a medallion at the end of it that shows the head of Alexander the great conqueror of the world through war. But we know, of course, that Aristotle was the tutor of Alexander. So you've got education in this as well. And there are books in the background. And the time is, of course, all collapsed. Alexander is not in the time of Aristotle. Aristotle is not in the time of Rembrandt. There's history in this. And you begin to get the sense that it's multi-dimensional, or more than multi-dimensional, that what is being painted here, and of course it's art itself, art is involved in this, that what is involved here is something that is pre-disciplinary, that coming into the modern age, and this is coming into the modern age, which is an age of disciplines, of departments in universities, where you say, okay, you do this and I do that, and this is your field, this is my field, and your field's not my field, so don't ask me a question about your field, and you can't get into my field. That's not the way the world works. That's not the human condition. Things come at you all at once in a multidimensional way that the idea of specific disciplines just doesn't work. And Rembrandt is showing that here. Distinctively, he's painting Aristotle in the clothing of a Dutch stadtholder. And that's, Rembrandt's neighborhood. This is painted in, what does it say, 1653, I think? Okay, that's 5 years after 1648. 1648. The date, the year. It's the start of the international system at the Treaty of Westphalia. And who's the winner in that war? It's the 30 Years' War between the Holy Roman Empire and the new states of Northern Europe. And the states win. And among the winners, notably among the winners, is the new Dutch state. So here is Aristotle as a Dutch stadtholder, and he is challenging himself, or he seems to recognize the responsibility to try to make sense out of this war that has just ended and the wars to come. Homer, tell me what to do. How do we handle this? Because it's an entirely new dispensation in some sense. And out of this will come, staggeringly, over a lot of time, will come the international state system. And that has got a rhetoric of its own. It's not a rhetoric that we usually associate with rhetorics, but it is a rhetoric. It's the rhetoric eventually of international law. Grotius is active. Grotius comes into his career vocation in the 30 Years' War with the laws of war, which profoundly needs more attention in some sense than it has been given, although it's been given a lot of attention. Again, a way of trying to constrain the horrors of war by producing a language that different societies would be able in common to sign on to. And in that sense, the 30 Years' War, Westphalia, and this international system produces something that can be universal. And I think it's pretty clear that this will be, and still is, in a very raggedy way, the only such system that is accessible or can win through persuasion the adherence of any culture anywhere in the world. Because primarily it's procedural. That is, there are very simple procedures in this system. You follow the procedures, that is, you're a state, you try to adhere to international law, you follow the laws of war, and you field a professional military and a professional diplomatic service, and adhere to very, very few norms, such as no slavery. And you've got a system there. You can track warfare in some sense ever thereafter by how this is going. For several years, maybe some of you have been in some contact with this, the American National Defense University in Washington, under the Defense Department, has run a year-long or academic year-long course for senior colonels from militaries coming from all around the world, coming from Senegal and Singapore and Sweden and Fiji, everywhere, South Africa. And in the course of the year, they travel around the country, and they have come to Yale, and I have been asked to talk to them. But the main thing in that event is one that impresses itself upon me, not me upon them, and that is that they all know each other, they all operate together, they have the same rank system, they have exchanged billets in staff colleges that are common to them. They have a common rhetoric. They are professional military people. And it's an amazing thing. It would be like sitting around here where everyone here came from a different country. And everybody was a colonel. And this country and that country may be close to war with each other. They might have bitter policy disputes. But in this setting, they didn't. They had this commonality, which was a rhetoric of a structure of international order. And you can track modern history in the sense that every major war has been a war against the system. Every major war has been an attempt to destroy it. Or if not destroy it, I mean, going back to the 30 Years' War. 30 Years' War was an attempt of empires to hang on against the new states. And if the Holy Roman Empire had won, they would have smashed the state. But they lost. The Napoleonic Wars against this system. Franco-Prussian War. World War I, World War II. Were really, in one way or another, wars of the empire strikes back. The empire's trying to overthrow the established system and rhetoric of order. That's what World War II, in some fundamental sense, was about. Imperial Japan and this greater East Asian co-prosperity sphere to gain a sphere of influence over Asia, and in the course of doing so, turning against, leaving the League of Nations, violating international law, violating the laws of war, and Hitler's Germany, the Third Reich, an empire, seeking a sphere of influence through all of Europe and a good part of Russia. Again, with the idea of overthrowing the established order. Hitler saying that he would sign his victory documents at Westphalia to show that the established system was finished. So, where I want to go from this is that to try to situate ourselves as to where, when I say we, I mean, I think everybody here, in one way or another, is part of what you could call the international state system. Certainly Israel's strategy has been profoundly focused on this system in security terms and in diplomatic terms. Part of this, and yet we are rhetorically in a bizarre situation. And this is not new. It's something that has been developing over a long period of time. So the international rhetoric I've just been talking about is fundamental, it's structural. It's like the scaffolding. Being procedural, it in many ways tries to stay away from substance. This is a very important point. It may seem a little bit hard to follow. The best way I can think of it is that when I was at the UN, I worked for Boutros-Ghali as Secretary General in the 1990s, mid-1990s. UN officials then and before strictly understood this. They understood that they were the organization of its member states, the states of the international system. And therefore, it was the UN's job to strictly stay within the procedures and not get substantive. So a UN official in the 1990s and before that would not recognize democracy as anything that would be of any interest to the UN. The word democracy does not appear in the UN Charter. Democracy, in this point of view, is just one of many political ways of organizing political life. There's socialism, there's fascism, there's democracy, on and on and on. There's communism. And as long as the country involved follows the procedures of the system, then the UN says you're fine. It doesn't matter that you're communist. It doesn't matter that you're fascist. It doesn't matter if you're democratic. That changed with the end of the Cold War because nations coming out of the Cold War situation wanted to be democratic in that far-off time. And the UN had to begin to change that point of view. But that's a rhetoric, but it's a structural rhetoric. Now, along with this has come, brought this along again, just the wave in front of you. Very important book by Sir Michael Howard, general in the British Army, War and the Liberal Conscience. What Sir Michael is writing about here is that there has grown up a rhetoric within this system, the international system, or within what we would call civilization, or internationalism, or the West. There's various names, the free world. Put whether label like that on it you want to, that there has grown up a fully worked out over time theory of the liberal mind about war, about warfare. And this has come about through the development of the laws of war, far beyond Grotius, coming out of the Battle of Solferino in the mid and late 19th century. A lot of it came out of the Franco-Prussian War that elaborated upon the requirements of professional warfare and making them ever more strict. That is, to be legitimate, you had to have your military personnel doing things in a strict way. You had to handle prisoners of war in a very careful and strict way. You have here the rise of the invention of the International Committee of the Red Cross. Along with this comes the development of human rights. And human rights is something that now in the modern world is not something that you say is a matter of a God-given right. It's done in the law school's terminology, done in a positivist way. You just sign on to it. If you sign on to it, then you are held to it. It's universalist. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is this. It very assiduously tries to keep any kind of substance out of the system, but it's a very fully worked out human rights approach. It's wonderful. These are achievements. Sir Michael was talking about how they begin to add up. Coming out of this is the idea, beginning with Kant and a few others around his time, of the democratic peace. That is, that in order to have, this is Kant's little essay, Perpetual Peace, which is a fascinating document to analyze, that only republics, only a polity in which government is by consent of the governed, will be inclined toward peace. Because the people won't want to be in war. In contrast, Kant says, to not that long ago, in Kant's time, he's writing this in 1795, not that long ago, it was the barons and the dukes and the kings who said, in sort of Herodotean terms, come on, boys, let's go grab that piece of territory across the valley, and then it'll be ours. We'll go to war. And nobody can stop him. But Kant says if you have a republic or a democracy, the people won't want their children to fight the wars, and if they have to get into a war, they'll want to get out of it as quickly as possible. And this then, from a point of view, says that well, you should have more democracies, the more democracies the better. It also conveys a sense that governments make wars. And therefore, you've got to have, if a war happens, it's the government's fault. So what happens when a democratic government makes war? It must be the government's fault. There's another angle of thinking about this. We get appeasement after World War I. There begins to rise the sense that the wrongdoers are really, we are the wrongdoers. Germany really was wronged in the Versailles settlement. So the British, at Oxford, they resolved not to fight for king or country because really wasn't it our fault to begin with. After World War I, a tremendous rhetorical upheaval of peace. The war was supposed to be fought to end all wars. You get the Kellogg-Briand Pact. You get disarmament, big disarmament initiatives. The idea that war can be abolished, that war can be, that as part of international law, you can outlaw war. After World War II, with the Korean War, we get into what, in one important book, I guess about almost 20 years ago, the end of victory. You no longer fight wars to win. The atomic bomb had something to do with this. We didn't fight the Korean War to win the war. We didn't fight the Vietnam War to win the war. The wars of Iraq and Afghanistan not fought to be won. What are they being fought for? It rhetorically increasingly becomes difficult to say what they are being fought for, because the leaders don't want to tell you what they're being fought for, because they open themselves to more criticism about it's all our fault. And this is sort of deeply into media coverage, as we can see every day in the last 10 or so years. The New York Times simply refused to report the wars. They would only report the mental distress of soldiers, or collateral damage, or corruption, or how awful our partners who we were fighting the war with and for were, and how arrogant they were toward us, and how much it cost. But you would never report the war. Absolutely not. And then, not in Sir Michael's book, but PBS NewsHour. Here again are photographs of those killed in a way that you begin to think they really enjoyed doing that. So in a way, there's a new art of war, in Sun Tzu's terms, coming out of this. I'm extrapolating from Sir Michael's point of view, that there has grown up over now a long period of time, maybe 150 years or so, maybe more, a sense that war is not part of the human condition. War is not part of human nature. War is an aberration, and those who are in it or have to fight it or feel they have to fight it are somehow misguided and doing the wrong thing. They are wrongdoers. or worse. Technology has added to this, not in the way I think talked about so much today, but with television. I was in the Vietnam War era in Vietnam, and the idea of fighting a war on television had never happened before. And that was something that if you had in Vietnam in the year 1972, if you had 87 firefights across up and down Vietnam, the television news back in America in the evening, Walter Cronkite would show you a firefight with Americans involved. In 1973, 74, there would be 2 firefights in Vietnam. But television news would show you that same firefight. It still would be 1 firefight shown on television. There was no recognition of the magnitude of the numbers involved. And so it fed into the idea that wars never end, that wars are always horrible, that wars are always the government's fault, and that you have to be moralistically opposed to it, above it, if you're going to be a good citizen. So that's a rhetoric. If you're thinking of the rhetoric of the international system, this is a rhetoric that goes along with it. There's another rhetoric, and I'll go through this and we can have some discussion about it, which is about the same age in terms of going back, well, maybe a little earlier than the liberal conscience rhetoric, that comes out of this same civilization. What is unique about this rhetoric I'm about to talk about is that it comes out of the West, it comes out of the free world, it comes out of the civilization, it comes out of the same system. It's not an enemy. It's not an enemy's rhetoric. It's a rhetoric produced from within the system. And that is anti-civilizational. I don't know, historians here in the room can perhaps point out something where there's another society that has had a deep undercurrent of the most profound thinkers and powerful movements that are opposed to the civilization itself. If you think back to Aeneas and his Rome, you know, there's not an anti-Rome system going on in this kind of power. And it begins with, in my view, it begins with Rousseau. Rousseau declares in the Discourse on the Origins of Inequality, and then follows it up in the Social Contract, that there is no legitimate government, that there never has been a legitimate government, that there's no legitimate government now, says Rousseau. And there's never going to be a legitimate government unless you do what I tell you in the social contract. And that's because of it all went wrong when the first person invented the idea of property. It all went wrong when the first person said, far back in the mists of time, this is mine. And so until you abolish that in the way I'm going to tell you through a revolutionary process, you'll never get legitimacy. So this is a fundamental, and the French Revolution comes out of this, it's a fundamental declaration that civilization as we know it is illegitimate. In the French Revolution, Robespierre's, if you want to find the origin of something, you know, go and read Robespierre's speeches. You know, Robespierre just went from one event to another every day in 1793, 1792, speaking Jacobin clubs. He speak anywhere. And you can see him developing the idea that comes out totally, clearly, vividly, that virtue requires terrorism, that terrorism is virtue. And he explains it to you. You've got to do this. You've got to be a terrorist, because unless you are, you're not going to be virtuous. And why is that? It's because civilization is bad. Civilization is wrong. Civilization, and Rousseau says this too, civilization is itself war. Civilization is unending, perpetual, never-ceasing war. It's war on the people. And you can only get peace by violently overthrowing, through warfare, civilization, through terrorism. So the goal is still peace, but it's a real peace. But it can only be achieved by defeating the war that's all around us that is illegitimate. These are different strands to this. They are not directly related. That's on the left. On the right, in Germany, there is discernible across the 19th century something that I have thought of as the UR project. Now think of Ur as Ur of the Chaldees, or Pilsner Urquelle. I mean, the origin of something that goes back before civilization. If you go through German thinkers across many different fields, Schliemann in archaeology, Müller in linguistics, the brothers Grimm in folk tales, and you move into Marx, Nietzsche, Freud, eventually Heidegger. You find a theme all throughout that the only way to become authentic is to go back before civilization. In other words, to get out of this hideous situation of civilization, you've got to locate yourself in the most far remote origins of the pre-Socratic world, back in the time of Archilochus and those who wrote on fragments, Heraclitus. And that would be purity. In this, you are getting a long line of thinkers, and from the thinkers you're getting actors that in some sense underlies the rise of Nazism. This is on the right. There's left and right, different rhetorics. And this rhetoric is, we are going to escape from civilization because we're going to become more authentic, because we're going to attach ourselves more to the blood and the soil of our proper land in the world. So here you've got a structural rhetoric of the system, which is deteriorating. It's deteriorating rapidly, and I think more vividly so in the last several years, with what China is doing in the maritime waters of Asia, what Putin has done in Crimea and in Ukraine, with failed states, with non-governed spaces in the world. That rhetoric has been sifting away. Alongside it, coming out of that same civilization, is this rhetoric of war, any war, every war is bad. And anybody in it is bad. And we're for peace. And then on the other side of it, you're getting the anti-civilizational rhetoric that says we've got to become more like our most remote forebears before the civilization that we now think that we're in. Now, all of this is going on when we have another war against the system. In other words, if all of the major wars have been against this international Westphalian system up through World War II and the Cold War. Cold War certainly was deliberately at all points designed by the Soviet Union against the existence of the international system. The latest version of it is an Islamist war. So the main point is, how can we deal with this latest Islamist war taking place against the system when the system's in such terrible shape and when these rhetorics are coming at us that are debilitating our ability to know what we're doing, coming at us from different points of the political compass. And where does this fit into the question of war and human nature? Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.